Okay, I'd like to call the regular City Commission meeting of December 7th, 2021 to order and ask all of you to join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Start with a roll call. Commissioner Jenks.
Currently present, thank you.
Commissioner Olsman.
Present.
Mayor Paul present. Mayor Pro Tem Elder and Commissioner Roselle are excused. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So move. Second.
Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Approval of the consent agenda. Do we have a motion?
So move. Support.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Now we're moving right along to our elected officials remarks. We have 3 elected officials here with us this evening, so why don't we start with Senator Jeremy Moss.
I'll bring up State Rep. Regina Weiss, if that's okay.
Okay, 2 at once.
You know, it's a little road show that we've been taking around town. So
Okay.
Mastered it. So, good evening, Commission. We're very excited to be here. I'm Jeremy Moss, the State Senator for Huntington Woods and 11 communities in southern Oakland County with my partner in the legislature.
I'm Regina Weiss. I'm the state rep for 7 communities, including Huntington Woods in southeast Michigan.
Yeah, and I think we just wanted to give a brief update of things that are going on in Lansing that impact us back home here in Huntington Woods. Specifically starting off with the budget that we just passed in the fiscal year that ended on September 30th. And we worked really hard to get some big wins here back home here in southern Oakland County. So I don't serve on the Appropriations Committee, so I yield to the expert on the Appropriations Committee, my colleague Rep. Weiss.
So we were very fortunate, and when we were looking at the beginning of this fiscal year, we were looking at when we had our revenue estimating conference back at the beginning of the year. We were thinking that we were going to have $1 billion to $1.5 billion deficit. We ended up having a surplus of more than that, and that is in large part thanks to a lot of the federal relief that has come in and investment back into Michigan, which investing into regular people and making sure that people are supported, that money has gotten invested back into our economy, which has increased revenues. And so we have seen our revenues not only remain stable, but actually increase over the last year. And so as a result of that, we were able to approve a budget for the 2022 fiscal year that is invests heavily in a lot of the things that we very much prioritize, both for our general budget as well as for school aid. And so I'm going to go through, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read through some really exciting highlights from that budget, both for the general budget and then for school aid. And so we were able to provide a historic investment in childcare, making sure that that families have access to quality, affordable childcare while they're at work, which we know has been a huge barrier in our unemployment crisis. We fully funded the Michigan Reconnect and Futures for Frontliners tuition scholarship programs, which help people be able to further their education in order to expand our skilled workforce. We provided new investments in drinking water and contaminated site cleanups to protect our water. We fund lead service line replacement, high water infrastructure, and dam safety grants. It included funding for new community revitalization grants to redevelop neighborhoods and support small businesses. We invested more money into infrastructure and funded over 100 local bridge projects. There was a wage increase for direct care workers who are on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. We increased revenue sharing to local governments by 2%, which we already know is great, but also not nearly what it should be. We were actually advocating for a 4% increase, but the fact that we were able to increase it obviously was great because we have not done that in a very long time. And we will continue to advocate for increasing money back into revenue sharing as we move forward. We ensured that our seniors receive the care that they need by supporting senior care facilities and expanding affordable care options. We invested in funding for local and state first responders, including police accountability measures like body cameras and professional development training. We also actually passed just through the House an additional supplemental this past week for additional money for public safety. That's now over to the Senate, and that will possibly be moving before the end of the year. We'll see what happens with that. We also have funding for our Clean Slate program, which allows individuals to expunge their records to receive a fresh start, and funding for healthcare disparities initiative and an expansion of the Medicaid coverage to include sickle cell disease and address healthcare inequity exposed by COVID-19. Additionally, for the school aid budget, one really huge win, I think, in my opinion, for the school aid budget is that we were actually able to pass it on time. So our apologies for not getting you guys your budget sooner. So you had, from a local government perspective, an idea of what the state was going to be passing down. But for school aid, we were actually able to pass it before July 1st. And so our districts were able to better plan for and prepare for the school year. It was a historic investment that invested more money into K-12 education than we ever have in the state of Michigan. We were able to, for the first time ever, close the funding gap, which is something that's been a goal in the state since the passage of Proposal A in 1994. We were finally able to do it this year. So every district in the state now gets a baseline of $8,700 per pupil, which is also higher than what the maximum foundation was prior to this year. So everyone got a bump and everyone's getting the same amount at this point. We also increased the investment for pre-K so that all pre-K students also get $8,700 per pupil through our Great Start Readiness program. And we made sure that we expanded that program so that every eligible child in the state has a slot to be able to access that program. Now, there's still a lot to be done. We are still sitting on $8 billion-ish in unappropriated dollars, including $5.76 billion in unappropriated money from the American Rescue Plan. And so we're continuing to push to get that money out. As I mentioned, there was a supplemental that went through this past week through the House for funding for additional funding for public safety and law enforcement. There's also another supplemental that will likely be moving tomorrow through the House Appropriations Committee that I serve on to appropriate additional funding for healthcare workers and hospitals to help address the continued spike in COVID-19. But we still have lots of other issues left to address. And so we're going to continue to work and push to get that money out the door. So I'm sorry, I know that was a lot.
No, you're good. I think you're good. And I can just add a few additional notes. So obviously, State Rep Weiss serves on the Appropriations, the Budget Committee. I serve on policy committees. So I'll talk about some of the things that we're doing on the policy end. We all endured a summer of storms, persistent storms like I don't think we've ever seen before. And as we're seeing these extreme weather events in our communities, I certainly got a lot of calls from Huntington Woods to try and connect them with DTE. You know, DTE was out and about in the community trying to resolve some of these issues. But as these extreme weather events become more common, we need to have infrastructure that's more resilient to these events. We need resiliency for our communities, for our roads, for our neighborhoods, and for our bottom line infrastructure. So I joined with colleagues in both the House and the Senate to introduce legislation, which we've called our Climate Resiliency Plan. And you can go to my website, which is senatormoss.com, and look up this release that we put out, which has the full viewing of the plan. But some of the main framework of it is to ensure that we're serving our constituents as they experience power outages and floodings and try to get them better service from our state government. One of the things that we have is we've introduced Senate Bill 748, which creates a state weatherization program to help low-income residents in better weatherizing their homes. We are proposing to create a weatherization and disaster relief navigator program, so you don't get lost in this maze of bureaucracy as you're trying to seek relief for some of the disasters that have hit our communities back home. We are trying to require environmental permits before building a new state highway trunk line infrastructure to ensure that our new infrastructure matches what the climate situation is in any given area of the state. We want to require each water utility to have a backup power source if the primary source fails, to prevent pumping stations from running out of power during a flood. And then we want to actually emphasize the importance of the emergency notification system to Michiganders when there's a natural or environmental disaster, to ensure that local communities have all the information they need to get that information and turn it out to our local residents. So we're kind of very aware. We endured it too, all throughout our district, these massive flooding events, these infrastructure disasters, the power outages. We've been in constant communication with the utility companies and with local residents here in Huntington Woods to try and better connect them if there was an issue in the neighborhood. So we're on call still on those issues. And I know that, you know, we're getting windier days here in the early part of winter. So if you ever need any help connecting with the utilities, don't hesitate to reach out to our office. And then one other policy item that I want to talk about is obviously the situation at the north end of the county in Oxford High School. In June of 2016, myself and a few other legislators joined with our founder of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus in the legislature, a guy by the name of Robert Wittenberg. Might be familiar with you. But Robert, truly, and I give Robert all the credit in the world for doing the deepest dive in research on ways to mitigate gun violence in our communities. And we established this caucus in June of 2016. A week later was the Pulse nightclub shooting. So from Pulse nightclub until last week in Oxford, enduring all of these mass shootings around the country and here in the state of Michigan, some of those that still persist all throughout the state, we've offered solutions, proven solutions to prevent these types of incidents, and that could have saved countless of lives. We've proposed universal background checks. We've proposed red flag laws and extreme risk protection orders. Someone is unstable and maybe threatening harm to themselves or to others, allowing due process so that they don't have immediate access to firearms. We've proposed safe storage laws that clearly was a gap here in this Oxford situation where the gun was in an unlocked drawer. We want to ensure that guns are never in the hands of minors and that those guns are safely stored. We've proposed this legislation term after term, session after session, and it's just very tragic that now the most recent act of gun violence happened in our own county. It really feels like our own backyard. So we're continuing to persist and push forward these common sense proposals. These are popular. These are not just popular generally, but these are popular amongst gun owners. And so we are on top of this issue. We won't stop. Our Gun Violence Prevention Caucus has grown from just a handful of legislators really to members in both the House and Senate who are really trying to stay focused on this issue because this is a uniquely American problem. And other states have stepped up to pass these measures that I just outlined, and there's no reason why Michigan can't join the other states that have figured out a way to mitigate these problems and certainly save lives due to gun violence. So those are the two major policy proposals, infrastructure and gun violence, that we are working on in the state legislature at this time.
And the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus will be having a press release on, a press conference
yeah.
on Thursday regarding a new package of bills that we are going to be rolling out regarding
Magazine capacity.
Magazine capacity. And so I encourage everyone to be on the lookout for that. As Senator Moss said, we're going to continue to push these issues and fight for these issues. And in addition to making sure that we are providing the support that our communities and our schools need to help mitigate, prevent these crises, and also help respond to them. And I know that the county is doing some really good work around that, and we have our county commissioner up next, so we'll just tee it off to Charlie.
Unless there are any questions from the commission and mayor.
Commissioner Jenks.
Thank you. 28 Michigan highway pumping stations went out in the Metro Detroit area, flooding the freeways, making it impossible for people to go to work, in many instances for many days. None of those were the result of MDOT. They were all the result of the power companies and what was going on there. Is there any way of dealing with liability when stuff like that occurs, because the public is harmed? Another question similar to that, a number of years ago, we asked the power companies when we were doing Scotia right out here, could we put all the power underground? And they gave us some kind of exorbitant charge that it would be per mile. They are unresponsive to us because we're a small community. Is there health care in our city, and I'm sure in all cities, has gone up the cost, and yet we're flatlined by Proposal A. There will be an exception in the next 24 months. Is there any way that you can consider making some of that healthcare money available to cities? Our community got a bump of 120 or 100.
Yeah, $120,000, roughly 17% increase in our healthcare cost for a small city.
And it might be helpful straight across the board because we provide public service. And the other note that I did was, is there any way that we can get park funding or some kind of funding relating to being able to better quantify the water volume that's coming through? There's a lot of electronic data systems that are out there and cameras that could be put in key spots, especially around this county, to see what's going on. And at least then the state and the county could focus on modifying those lines that are going through Oak Park and then Huntington Woods and then Royal Oak all the way on down, and pick those out so we're not repairing some of the main systems piece by piece.
Are you talking about camera monitoring of those lines?
I'm talking about camera monitoring done on a broader basis. Then we have to figure out what's going on Lincoln and Oak Park, or we have to figure out what's going on some street in Huntington Woods, where the lines are bad. If the state and the cities were able to cooperate, so we got some things, and I'm pretty sure the water commissioner in Oakland County, who was, an environmental guru, could help in identifying some of those lines. A lot of times, we look at it as a city, a county, or state function. So the water supply is a regional function.
Yeah, I think those are all great points, and there is a lot, so we'll try to work our way back and unpack some of them. So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I know I've been meeting with city managers across the 27th district, met just yesterday for Huntington Woods to talk about some appropriations priorities and to think a little bit more broadly about that. So I appreciate you bringing those points up. And I do think that there is some room for regional cooperations in general when we talk about a lot of these appropriations, especially when it comes to infrastructure. And we are going to be seeing additional money coming in through the federal government through infrastructure. We have the initial $10 billion that's going to be coming in. That was
all?
the initial $10 billion that's going to be coming in.
Spend that real quickly too.
Right. Yeah. We could spend that in Southeast Oakland County, let alone the state, on a lot of these things that we're talking about, particularly if you're looking at something like sewer separation or along those lines. But the $10 billion is the initial appropriation from the federal government. That's just formula that Michigan just gets automatically. Obviously, Michigan's going to be getting a lot more of that bill, but they have not yet figured out exactly how that's going to be appropriated. So we're waiting from the federal government to hear back about how that money is going to be split up, what the restrictions are, where it's how it's gonna be allocated. And we're hopeful that, some of that infrastructure money from the federal government can be used for some of these local regional projects that you just mentioned.
We're going right back to the first question, the failure of these systems that flooded the roads and the liability issue. I don't know if the liability issue has been tested yet. I mean, someone with a lawyer will definitely find out really quickly. But one of the things that we did introduce as a part of our climate resiliency package is redundancy, is that if one system fails, you have another system that's still operating. And that's one of the requirements of our Senate Bill 751 to require backup power if the primary source fails. To prevent these pumping stations from running out of power during a flood. That was one of the persistent issues that happened, as you mentioned. So we're trying to tackle that issue exactly head on.
But will it be clear that that backup power is a DTE or Consumers Energy responsibility and not an MDOT responsibility? Because DTE is doing the connection, not MDOT.
Yeah, we are tackling it right to the utilities themselves.
And then I forgot the middle question.
The other question was,
Healthcare.
is there some way that we, the cities,
Dollars.
not just the poor cities,
Yeah,
but all cities can get some help with the health care components of their budgets?
yeah, we can definitely look into that. And if whoever can forward me the information, we're gonna be voting on a healthcare supplemental tomorrow. And I don't know exactly what the details of that are gonna be, unfortunately. When we're in the minority, we find out when we get there. But we know that there's gonna be an appropriation made tomorrow for that, and then it'll go through the House, it'll go over to the Senate, it'll come back. And so there may be some money potentially in a supplemental, but then we're also currently working on, plans for our fiscal 2023 budget as well.
Well,
So-
it just, with the extra money, it may be enticing on both sides
Yeah.
for them to look, because I'm sure we're not a unique community. And if at least there could be supplementals that went to all cities.
We'll definitely look into
or
that, and I
at least where
appreciate
there
you.
was a deficit.
Commissioner Jenks, I appreciate you flagging that, because that is something that we're dealing with, like, very timely. So, I don't anticipate, I mean, we'll see. I don't know if it's gonna move before the end of the year or not, because it has to go to the Senate, it has to come back, it has to be worked out between the governor. But I appreciate you flagging that, because we can maybe possibly get something worked in there. And there may already be. We'll be able to have a better sense of that tomorrow.
All right.
I have two matters that I want to raise real quickly with you, because I'll address it in private correspondence to both of you. First is the issue of the cable companies like Comcast you have absolutely, as far as I can tell, no way to speak to a Comcast person in person about, say, a down line and things like that. Now, this didn't occur here in Huntington Woods, but I believe that, I know I dealt with people in Berkeley on an issue of a down line, and the impossibility of talking to anybody at Comcast, because if you use their call in and they take your phone number, they say, well, you must be asking about your address because it tracks to your phone number. You have absolutely no way to speak to somebody to say, we have down lines here, how do we rectify it? So I'm going to address it to you in separate correspondence, but the city of Berkeley told me they have no identifiable person or identifiable phone number to call as a municipality for a problem like that. Yeah. And I think that is a terrible deficiency in the system. That the people in the city of Berkeley said they have no person, no contact who they can reach out to say, we have a problem, can you help us? And this comes right back to what you started talking about in the beginning about the unresponsiveness of DTE. Trust me, the only way anybody's going to get a call from DTE is to call you, and then maybe you might get a call.
A lot of people did call me, so we
called
worked it out.
They called Wittenberg a few years ago too.
Yeah, yep.
And then on the second point, and I'll address this to you in separate correspondence. I spoke to the mayor about this the other day. On Woodward, between 11 and Lincoln, there are a number of parking cutouts in front of Bank One, in our JP Morgan Chase, and in front of a couple other areas. There are these odd sort of parking cutout areas, and that's all MDOT. They're in a bad state of repair. They have been for years. And we went through this a few years ago trying to do something with MDOT and got absolutely nowhere with them on that. But Bob said, the mayor informs me that a number of cities have petitioned MDOT about either reconfiguring or improving these things, because they're just, I don't think that in 2021 they serve the same purpose that they may have 30 years ago. For example, at Woodward and 11, it seems to me that when a bus pulls over to pick up passengers, they should be able to get all the way over so they're not impeding traffic. It would be safer for everybody if they could do that, the passengers, the people driving, and everybody. But Bob said, the Mayor Paul says that this is apparently being solicited by other cities as well. So I'll address it with you again privately, but I do think this is something that's high time that we dealt with it. The poor condition of these things in terms of their paving and surface, the holes, the potholes and things like that. So like I said, we don't even take any more time tonight, but we appreciate seeing both of you here tonight, and it's nice to see both of you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll follow up. I don't know if you know if there's a government relations person that specifically deals
Well, the
with-
Comcast issue, we'll certainly follow up
Yeah.
with you on that. Regarding DTE, the thing that I heard most from Huntington Woods to all the communities that I represented was the inaccuracy of the restoration
Yeah.
time. You know, if you can't get through to a person, you hear when you think it's going to be restored, and it just was flat out inaccurate. And they didn't achieve those goals of being restored by a certain time. I told that directly to DTE. I said, if you can at least give our residents a sense of when things are actually going to come back on, you can go on with your lives and have an expectation of when power is going to be restored. If you're going to have an automated system, you have to have accurate information in the automated system, and we will take that to Comcast too.
Right,
Yep.
like I said, I'll take it up with you privately
You got
in
it.
correspondence, but on the issue of the inaccuracy of the information, it isn't just the inconvenience and the frustration factor, where you have a substantial number of elderly residents
Absolutely.
who, are in the winter are deprived of heat, in the summer they're deprived of air conditioning, then it becomes a health issue.
You got it.
And it's absolutely incomprehensible that people, like you said, don't have at least a reasonable expectation of what's going on and what they really need to do to protect themselves. Either go to somebody else's house, go to a hotel, do something to protect yourself. So the inaccuracy is not just, boy, they told me the wrong thing, that really makes me mad. It's, in some cases, it can lead to, very bad, serious consequences.
Yeah.
And to go to the extreme of finding out how to fill the paperwork for a $20 credit. That's, it's just ridiculous.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll follow up about Comcast for sure. And I appreciate you raising these issues. I know that for the MDOT question, we can follow up about that as well. But I know that MDOT does do grants for certain types of programs. I believe Ferndale is in the running right now to get a grant for some work that they're doing on Woodward. So there is possibilities for that, depending on the scope. But there is also, and you can speak more to this, Senator, because this was before my time, where we've had, I saw it
Are you
from
calling me old?
No, I'm from, you're a week older than me. I saw it from the city side when I was on city council in Oak Park, where we had raised issues regarding the maintenance of like the overpass of Coolidge and some of the crumbling brick infrastructure. You and then Rep. Wittenberg were able to make sure that actually got repaired. So we can, if there's specific issues with some crumbling infrastructure, we can work on that as well. If you're talking about redesign, we can also provide some resources for potential
Like I said,
grants.
we'll start the ball rolling.
You got it.
with Formal correspondence, but thanks for coming tonight.
Of course,
Absolutely.
thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. We appreciate all your hard work. And I will tell you that maybe some of your discussions with DTE have resulted in some positives, because I'm going to stand up for DTE a little bit, because we had a power outage here in Huntington Woods 2 weeks ago, Hank, was it? And I can tell you that DTE was very responsive. They contacted the city and myself right after the power went out with an update on how it happened and what they were doing, and kept us informed every half an hour on what was going on. Hank was able to get e-blasts out to the community to let them know. So it worked very well. So maybe they're starting to listen.
Good.
Please come back.
Absolutely.
All right. County Commissioner Charlie Gavelle.
Evening, everybody. So we're going to talk about three things. Trying to be as tech as the state senator and state representative. So first, as was mentioned, Oxford, and in an effort to not forget first the 32 other mass shootings that happened earlier this year already, and then Oxford being the 33rd, the county is kind of doing double time to figure out what we're going to do in a accurate and appropriate response, and also thinking ahead that would be countywide applicable. So that should be coming out before the end of the year. But in light of that and before that, we have started offering free mental health counseling, where you can talk to licensed mental health professionals, because mind you, after, if you all didn't hear about this, but after Oxford happened the next day, there were 60 threats called into 60 different schools around the metro area. So this is one of those things where, as Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald said when she was charging the shooter or the suspect, that it was, it's an act of terrorism. So this is something that isn't just affecting Oxford. It's not just affecting those families or parents. It's affecting all of us. So there is mental health counseling available. So starting today, but going from the 7th, 8th, and 9th from 2 to 7 p.m. It's online, it's via phone, and it's in person. And I can share that information with anyone that would like it. And it's offered for free by Oakland County. So please take advantage of that. Second, talking about COVID. July 5th, we had 9 positive COVID cases in Oakland County. As of Monday, we had 901 positive cases. So please be mindful of that. Beaumont Health also mentioned in their weekly update to county commissioners that out of the 468 people that were in, sorry, this is why I don't do the phone thing. But in Oakland County, in all of Beaumont's hospitals, just as an example, there are 607 people in the emergency department in Beaumont Hospital systems that have COVID-19. Of those 607, 468 are unvaccinated and 139 are fully vaccinated. So again, just giving you more data information to offer context as we go into the end of the year. And last thing, what the County Commission will be doing this week, there's a couple important things and then a bunch of other stuff that is also important but not as interesting. So the two important things are, first, we're going to be having our first meeting to determine the specific policies and procedures on how to grant out $2 million in water and sewer infrastructure money to local communities. And I'm proud to say that our 18th District County Commissioner worked with the Republicans to get this passed and to make this happen. So please be on the lookout for the grant requirements to be coming out shortly, because we're going to have that meeting tomorrow. And then the second thing is we're going to boost the county funding to Haven, which is a domestic violence shelter, by 40%, because that is still a need. So that's the update. Any questions?
Charlie?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now moving on to public participation. This is an opportunity for the public to make a comment for something that is not on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, we'll close public participation and move on to our regular items of business. I'm going to start with the 2020-21 financial statements. Tim, do you want to start?
So I have Aaron Stevens here from Manor Casterison, our audit firm. He's going to give a presentation, but I just wanted to highlight a few points first that may not be in his presentation. As State Rep Weiss mentioned, it was a weird year with COVID in the budget, so we ended up having $621,000 in increase in fund balance in the general fund, primarily from the COVID money. And also I wanted to mention, we passed that Act 345 millage last year. You'll see throughout this budget, or this audit, sorry, 3.3 million in capital improvements. Our pension funding moved from 62 to 69% funded, and our OPEB moved from 14 to 21% funded. So you can see the kind of the fruits of that money throughout this audit. I'll turn it over to Aaron.
So you have a copy of the full annual comprehensive financial report, but what I've done is put together this presentation handout, and this is what I intend to go over tonight. I did not duplicate the financial statements in this presentation. I have simply put some charts and graphs together and highlight what I think are the key areas. So with that, a couple of general comments. Our thanks to Tim and the rest of the city staff for their courtesy, cooperation, and assistance. We know that we're a disruption to the normal routine here, and so we do appreciate all the help. We've had a couple of challenging years with the pandemic and having to do some of our auditing remotely, but we've gotten through it together. It's a collaborative effort, and we do appreciate all of the help. Again, I plan to highlight the key areas, but if you've got questions, feel free to stop me at any time, and we can go through those. This slide here is just an agenda overview. I'm going to highlight a few paragraphs out of the independent auditor's report. We will briefly discuss the government-wide financial statements, and then we'll break that down into some detail with highlights of the general fund, and then highlights of the water and sewer fund with, again, some charts and graphs. And then we'll look forward to the upcoming accounting pronouncements, and I sometimes refer to that as the Auditor Employment Act section of my presentation. So with that, the independent auditor's report is presented on pages 17 and 18 of the bound financial statements. And I always like to start out with a reminder that the purpose or the objective of an audit is to express opinions on the financial statements. The purpose of an audit is not to detect fraud or give you an opinion on your internal controls. And that is because fraud detection, deterrence, and prevention are management responsibilities. Now, if we find fraud, we certainly have a responsibility to communicate that to you, and we would do so in the form of a written report on internal control. But that's a byproduct of the audit. The purpose of the audit is to express opinions on the financial statements. So the independent auditor's report, as I said, I've included a few paragraphs on the next three slides. In the second paragraph on page 17 of the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, we highlight that management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements. These are not our financial statements, they're yours, they're the city's. And that responsibility also includes the internal control over the preparation and fair presentation of the financial statements. In the third paragraph on page 17, we state that our responsibility is to express opinions on the financial statements based on our audit. And then we finally, we get to the opinions in the first paragraph on page 18, and we have expressed what we refer to as unmodified opinions on the financial statements. And you can tell that they're unmodified opinions because we state, in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects. That is the important phrase, that is the unmodified opinion, or opinions, because there's more than one opinion unit. But to put that into some perspective, there are three types of opinions we can express. You have the unmodified opinions. We could have expressed a qualified opinion, and that might read something like, except for capital assets, the financial statements are fairly presented. We could have expressed an adverse opinion where the financial statements do not present fairly the financial position of the city of Huntington Woods. The only other alternative that we have as auditors would be to disclaim an opinion altogether. We couldn't audit your records. So of our options, you have the highest level of assurance that we can provide for a set of financial statements, and that's what you want to see as a commission. Now, your report, your bound report, does include two types of financial statements. You have government-wide financial statements, and then you have fund-level financial statements. Government-wide financial statements are prepared on the full accrual basis of accounting, and they primarily have a long-term perspective. Government-wide financial statements are prepared once a year. The only time you see that level of reporting is in this bound report. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes on them. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on the government-wide statements, but there are two government-wide statements. You have the statement of deposition and the statement of activities. And those are broken down into activity types. You've got governmental activities and business-type activities. So for the governmental activities, the statement of deposition is presented on page 32. It's a snapshot as of June 30th, 2021. And there are a couple of financial performance indicators that I like to look at. One being the current ratio, and that's a measure of liquidity. How capable is the city of paying their bills in a timely manner? So we calculate that by taking the current assets and dividing by your current liabilities. And what that tells us is you can cover your current obligations for the governmental activities nearly 5 times over as of June 30th, 2021, which is healthy. That's a good current ratio. Another metric that I like to look at is the unrestricted portion of your net position compared to your annual expenses. And in this case, your unrestricted portion of net position for the governmental activities is a negative $13 million. The reason why is that your net pension liability, although noted improvement on the funding of the net pension liability and the net OPEB liability, collectively as of June 30th, 2021, those liabilities were $17.5 million. So those are the primary reasons why you have negative unrestricted net position for your government activities. On the next slide, the business step activities. So this, your only business step activity would be the same information that is reported in your water and sewer fund. So we'll touch on a few highlights here, but then we'll look at it in more detail when we get to the proprietary fund financial statements. The current ratio for the business step activities is 19.58, so you can cover your obligations nearly 20 times over for the business step activities with your current financial resources. When we compare the unrestricted net position to your expenses for the business step activities, it comes out to about 44%, which is nearly 5 months of operations. Again, we'll look at that in more detail when we discuss the proprietary funds, but just a couple of high-level metrics there. The other government-wide financial statements is a statement of activities. As you can see, it's presented on pages 33 and 34 of the bond report. It's a little backwards because we start with expenses in the left-hand column, and as you read left to right, you add in your program revenues, and then top to bottom, you add in your general revenues. So on. Yeah. So the important number on this statement of activities in my mind is the change in net position. So the third number from the bottom, that would be on page 34, would tell you that the governmental activities added $2,633,000 to net position for this fiscal year, and the business step activities added $1,263,000 to net position for this fiscal year. So a positive year in terms of activity. But that's what I had on the government-wide financial statements. Next, we'll turn to governmental funds financial statements. These are presented on pages 35 and 37. And governmental funds financial statements are prepared on a modified accrual basis of accounting. So this is a current financial resources focus. It's different than the government-wide statements, which are full accrual. The current financial resources focus. When we look at the balance sheet, for example, on page 35, what we don't see are the long-term items like capital assets, long-term debt, net pension liability, net OPEB liability. Those are not recognized under the modified accrual basis of accounting. This should be the fund level financial statement presentation should be a more familiar presentation for you. It's the level at which your budgets are prepared. It's the level at which your interim reporting is provided throughout the year. So governmental activities, governmental funds balance sheet is presented on page 35. Also a snapshot as of June 30th, 2021 of the governmental fund assets, liabilities, and the difference between the two would be your fund balance or equity. So I focused on the general fund for purposes of this slide. Your total fund balance as of June 30th, 2021 was nearly $4 million. And there are 5 potential classifications of fund balance. So we'll break that nearly $4 million down into potentially each of those 5 classifications that you see there: non-spendable, restricted, committed, assigned, and unassigned. Now, the city of Huntington Woods does not actually have any assigned fund balance as of June 30th, 2021 for the general fund, but you do have amounts in the other 4 classifications or categories. If you happen to have any assigned fund balance, I would take the total of the assigned and unassigned portions of your fund balance and collectively refer to that as unrestricted. You can assign an unassigned fund balance at will. It can be a management decision to do so. It's just earmarking it. Your future intentions for spending fund balance is done through an assignment. I would take that unrestricted fund balance, that collective total, in this case it's just unassigned fund balance, of $2,273,000, and I compare that to your expenditures and your other financing uses or transfers out to other funds. And so that's the calculation that you see on the right-hand side there. When you take that unrestricted Fund balance compared to your expenditures, it comes out to 28%. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends that you maintain a minimum fund balance in your general fund that is equal to 2 months of normal operations. 2 out of 12 months is about 17%, you're sitting at about 28%. So sound financial condition for the general fund. On the next slide here, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances for the governmental fund. Again, I just highlighted the general fund here. Total revenues, $8.6 million. That was an increase of approximately $520,000 over the previous year. So about a 6% increase in revenue for the general fund. Total expenditures, about $5 million. That was a decrease of $827,000 from 2020 expenditures. So about a 14% decrease in expenditures. You did transfer out to other funds just over $3 million, but you were able to add $621,000, as Tim said earlier, to your general fund balance. To give you a visual perspective of the last 5 years, this is the general fund, total revenues, total expenditures, and total fund balance. And as you can see, you've added to your fund balance. So revenues have exceeded expenditures in each of the past 5 years. So you have steady growth in the general fund balance. And again, ending 2021 in a very sound financial condition. In terms of the composition of your general fund revenues, taxes, 76%, which is you rely on your taxes. You need those tax revenues to come in. Intergovernmental revenue at 13%. That would include any federal, state, or local revenue coming in. In terms of comparison, in 2020, your taxes had a little bit higher percentage at 79%. Your intergovernmental revenue a little bit lower at 8% because it's because of the federal the COVID-19 grant funding. On the expenditure side, the composition of your general fund expenditures, public safety at 43%, followed by transfers out at 28%, very consistent with the 2020 composition. The dollars were less, but the composition was pretty consistent from 2020 to 2021. When we look at the last 5 years of the unassigned or unrestricted fund balance as a percentage of expenditures, you can see that you've had some fluctuation. It fluctuated from a low of 20% to a high of 28% over the past 5 years. But keeping in mind the 17% recommendation of the GFOA, you far exceeded that in each of the past 5 years. And in fact, on the next slide, this is in terms of dollars instead of percentages, but that orange bar represents 17% of your annual expenditures in each of those years. All right, then we get to the proprietary funds financial statements on pages 39 through 41. Again, full accrual basis of accounting, so it's the same basis of accounting that we saw for the government-wide financial statements. Same information reported under business type activities is reported in the water and sewer fund. That's your only business type activity. The fund level financial statements do provide more detail, but in a slightly different format, but it is the same information. The statement of deposition for the water and sewer fund is presented on page 39. Once again, a snapshot as of June 30th, 2021 of your assets, deferred outflows, liabilities, deferred inflows, and then the net of all of that would be your net position. So total net position for the water and sewer fund was about $7.5 million as of June 30th. And that is broken down into 2 classifications. You could potentially have 3. You don't happen to have any restricted net position. Restrictions on net position could include debt service, bond covenants, and so forth. You don't happen to have any as of June 30th, 2021. So you do have an amount that's invested in capital, and you do have an unrestricted amount. And when you, again, go through that same calculation of comparing your unrestricted net position to operating expenses, for purposes of this slide, I did back out the depreciation expense because it's a non-cash expense. And you still come up with 5.7 months of operations for the water and sewer fund that you have an unrestricted net position. Sometimes they get asked, well, what should it be? And that really depends. You can't look at a proprietary fund in the same way you look at the general fund. I don't have a benchmark that says 17% because it's dependent upon not only your operations, and in this case, 2 to 3 months here to be a little more conservative, but you also have to factor in debt service. Any principal and interest requirements that you have in the upcoming year, you would want to have that included in your minimum net position balance at the end of the year. And that is because any principal payments would be a reduction of a liability. Any interest expense would be a non-operating expense. So you have to factor that back in, as well as the most subjective piece of the calculation would be what are your capital needs? How much repair and replacement are you going to have to do in the upcoming year? And how much would you need to save in order to do a larger project, maybe 5 years down the road? So when I try to give a recommendation on minimum net position, unrestricted net position, you would want to tie this into your capital asset management plan and calculate what your needs are going to be in terms of capital repair and replacement as well. Here's a 5-year bar graph of revenues, expenses, and total net position for the water and sewer fund. It does look like their total net position is just skyrocketing, but remember that includes two components. You've got the amount that's invested in capital assets and then the unrestricted portion. So on the next slide, this is a little more realistic here. The orange part of that bar graph is what you've got invested in your water and sewer systems. You aren't going to sell the car to buy gas. That is not available for operations. That orange piece of the bar is not available for you to use. What you have available for use is the unrestricted portion of the bar, the blue section. And you did improve in both total net position as well as the unrestricted net position from 2020 to 2021. This slide here is a 5-year trend of the unrestricted net position as a percentage of operating expenses. In 2019, there was a restatement of the beginning net position to recognize the water and sewer fund's fair share of the net OPEB liability before it was all recognized under governmental activities, and that wasn't accurate. It really should be allocated between the two types of activities. And so you do see that significant drop in the unrestricted net position from 18 to 19, but then it rebounded and you're back up again in 2021. So as I said, this is the part that we look forward and see what we have on the horizon here. Upcoming accounting pronouncements presented on pages 75 and 76 under note 12. And there are two that will have an impact potentially for the city of Huntington Woods. The first one is GASB Statement 87 on leases. You'll have to recognize operating leases on the statement of net position. And so what will happen is you will, let's say you're leasing copiers, you will recognize the right to use that copier as a capital asset, intangible asset, as well as the liability, the debt, being the lease. And that statement is effective for the year that you're in now, for the year ending June 30, 2022. The GASB statement number 96 is on subscription-based information technology arrangements, which is a fancy way of saying leases of software. They do give you an additional year on that is effective for the year ending June 30, 23. My recommendation on this is let's start gathering that information now, determine what leases you have, and what the appropriate accounting will be for those going forward. So I think I went through that fairly quickly, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those. I do have my copy of the annual comprehensive financial report. If you've got a specific question about the financial statement or note disclosure.
You have any questions? Go ahead, Commissioner James.
Yeah, I have a question on Tim's portion. Didn't we also get a CAFR in June 2019? Your commentary said.
Yeah, I saw that, there's a mistake in that paragraph there.
Thank God.
I caught that this morning when I was reading through it. So we'll update that before it goes to press.
Okay. I thought, God forbid, we had lost 1 year. I didn't think that ever occurred.
No, that will not happen.
All right, I would also like to express my thanks, Tim, for all your hard work you put in this year. A lot of it single-handed.
Thank you.
We appreciate all the good efforts. Do we have a motion to accept the 2020-21 financial statements as presented?
Yeah, I'd like to also thank
First-
Tim.
First, let's get a motion on the table and then.
So moved.
Second. Okay, now you can make a comment.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Tim Rowland, our city treasurer and finance director, for a superb annual fiscal year 2021 comprehensive financial report, and congratulate you on being awarded another Certificate for Excellence in Financial Reporting. Thank you for the concise history of the city. Thank you for the explanation of our financial history, the impact of Proposal A on property tax revenues, and explaining the taxable value component, which has been or forced us into flatlined revenue for years, while the cost of salary and benefits has increased. Thank you for using up-to-date population figures from SEMCOG, which our outside consultants frequently don't have the capacity to do, and for the current revenue tables. I hope during the next year that we can get all departments that issue receipts such as recreation, as noted in the exception, to utilize a citywide receipt system.
Thank you, I appreciate that, Jeff. And just a comment on the rec center. So that was a comment referring to the cafe. The cafe's been closed the last 2 years, we haven't been able to implement the change yet. So it's a recurring comment from the last 2 audits.
Well, but is the system that the rec center is using for their receipts of money under your control, or something that just?
It is, yes. So the issue is more at the cafe where they're having issues with the system going down, and they were taking in receipts and handwriting them. Those need to be numbered receipts, so you can track that for a fraud control perspective. And we're gonna implement that as soon as the cafe opens back up.
Any public comment? Okay, with that, we have a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2 is a matter of consideration of an ordinance to amend Chapter 40, Zoning Article 6, General Provisions, Section 40-6.04, Height and Area Regulations and Exceptions. I'm going to turn this over to Hank just to give us a layman's version of what we're updating here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Basically, what you have before you is 2 small changes to this particular ordinance, which regulates the location of air conditioners and power generators. A lot of it was brought about by practicalities, and a lot of it was brought around by resident complaints as to not being able to locate these in reasonable locations. So what we've done is that we've stricken Section 3, which you see in the ordinance out, which is not more than 3 feet away from the related dwelling or principal building. That was originally put in to keep it close to the building in order to keep it away from the neighbors' properties. When we put that in, we had every intention of being able to do that. Practical experience has taught us that because the building code says that you can't have anything within 5 feet of an openable or potentially openable window, that we ran into a large conflict with that along the backs of people's houses, and hence created a lot more side yard placement requests than we would have normally received. So if we strike that, then they can put them in the rear yard and they can be further than 3 feet away, and it won't be a problem because they can comply with the 5-foot requirement of the building code and also locate them in their yard as they see fit, as long as they stay out of the restrictions of the regular side yard and rear yard requirements. So that's a good thing for that. The second change that we made to this was also having to do with a matter of practicality. And the phrase, if you take a look at where it says the city manager is the one that has to go ahead and approve the locations for these, we added and/or his designee and his/her designee. So the difference with that is that the city manager and whether it be Mark or the next city manager or the past city manager would always have to come to us to say, is this okay or does this seem reasonable? So we were doing the job anyway. And it takes a lot of the onus off of them where they might not have the particular expertise that the other departments may have, like the building department or the planning department, as to the proper location for these types of appliances. So as a result, we wanted to put that in there so that it could just simply go to us rather than go through the city manager to get to us. So if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question for you. Do we need a first reading?
Well, I was gonna ask you, I mean, you adopted the policy of doing 2 readings, but you can waive it if you want, but, either way, you can either introduce this at this
We
meeting
have-
or adopt.
Do we have permits pending that we need to address this with?
Well, the permits pending, we can always deal with the same way that we have been dealing with them for the time being. The benefit of this is it expedites the matter for our residents.
I think we can waive the first
Yeah.
reading, and
There's no problem.
that's what I would recommend we do. Need a motion to do that? Move to waive first reading
And adopt.
and adopt the ordinance as proposed.
Support.
Thank you. Any public comment? Comments or questions from the commission? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
And our final item of business is a matter of consideration of receiving and filing the Planning Commission annual report. We have a motion to approve.
So moved.
Support.
Any public comment? Comments or questions from the commission? Commissioner Jenks?
Yeah, I thought years ago when I became a master planner that we were to update the annual status of the master plan, the set of checklist items that are at the back of the program. Are we to do that? In other words, we adopt the master plan. At the back of that are a series of recommended steps or items, the last few pages of the plan. I thought on an annual basis that we were to review that and see if it's moving, rather than just every 5 years have it pop up,
Typically,
or 7 years.
I mean, that's not required.
yeah, typically, and I don't mean to, if you wanted to go ahead or.
No, that's,
Okay, basically what we do is we try to provide the city commission with an annual report as to what's going on so we can show that there is some movement and things have been accomplished. Obviously, at the 5-year interim, we have a much more extensive review than we do at the 1 year. And then at the 10-year, we go through what we're going through now, where we get resident participation and planning commission that. But on a yearly basis, the list may seem more checklist-like, only because those are the items that we can specifically address, and those are the things that we pull out that we've dealt with. So having said that, that gives us an idea and a list of progressions, because a lot of times the master plan has items in it that require funding, that require a lengthy process in order to implement or to get done. So as a result, those things don't actually show up on a yearly basis. So for you to take a look at just those things, you won't see as much as when you see what the actual basis of work that the planning commission has done. So I hope that answers your question.
Not really.
Well, I'm sorry, was there something else that you?
Well, the thing is that obviously we add things to it and we do different kinds of programs as well. But do we report on things that we have accomplished or barriers, such as this is a program area that we don't have funding for?
We don't do that, no.
Okay.
We've never said, no, we don't do this because we don't have any money for it. What we do is we try to accomplish what we can accomplish, list what we can accomplish, and those things that we need money for down the line. We try to buddy up to our finance director and see if we might be able to get a budget, for it. But other than that, that's typically what you would get is you would get the year's progress report for this. At the 5 years, you would get a little bit more extensive report, and then at the master plan system, you would get what we have going on now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to our city manager's report.
Just have a few items. First of all, I want to echo the comments of the commission in terms of Tim's work on this budget, on the audit. This is our 18th year of getting the GFOA award. Next year will be 19. We'll be submitting this very shortly as part of that. Commission approved Verigy, a couple of meetings ago, their staff is reviewing our plans, been here several times doing so. We're also looking at didn't know, Tim and I, we both had a different count, I'm not sure. We have 78 parking lot lights, and you know, tonight, a couple of them, well, the ones here are not working. We have to get after someone about that. We're looking at converting those to LEDs, so we'll have a price shortly that Tim and I will discuss and decide how we can proceed on that or bring it to the commission. There was some confusion about whether the Environmental Sustainability Committee is meeting in December. They are on the 16th here. I think they're meeting at 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock.
Okay. It wasn't on their annual list of meetings, however, I didn't catch it in there. What they showed as an agenda for December was really, didn't matter, but it was November's agenda. They forgot to change. Tim and I, and Heidi was involved in this, we're in the process, we have sent letters revoking our letters to our healthcare consultants. So after 40-some years, we're replacing what used to be J.S. Clark Agency, Assured Reporting, I think is their current title, with Manquin Vance, and we're looking at some healthcare changes that could result in some additional savings without changing programs to the employees. So, library director position has been posted. There is an open house on January 9th at the library from 2 to 4 for Ann Hager, retiring director. Position's been posted at TLN, Lib Michigan, Library of Michigan, SLC, the Suburban Library Cooperative, the two universities here in Michigan that still provide University of Michigan and Wayne State in terms of the Masters of Library Science, as well as at the Michigan Municipal League. So we're looking for good candidates for that. This is something I talked to our state representative about yesterday in a Zoom call, but there was a note from the governor's office that there's a subsidy program for the daycare workers and actually the facility. And as Tim mentioned briefly, we are applying for approximately $176,000. This will reside in some changes in our program, but Tim did great work in terms of putting this grant together. He had help a bit from Jenny Morgan, our person that deals with the daycare program. This will result in, for part-time help, $500 additional to those part-time employees, up to $1,000 for those full-time employees, some monies for the equipment and things like that at the facility itself. If this comes through, we're all waiting to see if the fine print that we couldn't see, is there something that eliminates us? But this is one of the values of having a credentialed program from the state. One of the things we'll also look at, the state is suggesting that there be a subsidy for those parents who use that particular program. So we'll be taking a look at that as well. Inflation rate, Tim confirmed to me, is 3.3%. That's the highest since 2009. I know that makes a difference in what our tax rate can get, or what the millage can generate. We have a meeting on Thursday with our engineers to go over the roads and projects for next year, the successes or problems that we had on this year. And the commission did receive, or I received, on behalf of the city, a petition from Talbot, one block of Talbot. I've spoken to one of the persons that circulated the petition. You know, it's sad when, after how many years that I've been gone, 30-some years, I recognize some of the names and know some of the people that live on the street. But the decisions on paving and road projects are based upon the conditions that are done and what's called a Paiser rating process. But after we have more information from the engineers, we'll be responding directly to the people on that. We received notice from Oakland County that they basically terminated their assessor of record, the Oakland County Equalization Director. Not exactly sure why, but they've assigned a new person who will sign our rolls. As you know, equalization does the assessing portion for most of the cities in the county. It's really great. And finally, for those that need to, we say happy holidays. For those that celebrate Christmas, we say Merry Christmas. And for those that have celebrated Hanukkah, we say Happy Hanukkah. And that's it for me.
Any questions from the commission?
Couple. That proposal is already in, you know, it has a December 8th deadline.
Yeah, we submitted it, we're scheduled for $177,000.
That's all?
Yeah, well, we're very happy to get that. Like Mark said, we're gonna provide some sort of subsidy back to the latchkey parents for the
Good.
money they're paying.
Can we get handicapped parking replaced back here? I trust
No.
that.
No,
Explain, this is not ADA compliant?
the
No.
ramp is not ADA compliant.
Can we get a ramp then that is ADA compliant?
That's the large cost.
That's
What is-
why,
What has been set up is ADA compliant.
Right now, I would approach Charlie, as well as the state. There must be money out there where that kind of activity could be carried out. People have to have the ability to easily get in the building and have parking adjacent to it.
those that use the ramp, there have been issues during the winter of the ramp. And of course, one of the issues that we looked at in the design was the inability, well, the problem is with the railing and the cost to replace that to the new requirements, or the change requirements, they're always changing the requirements for this, was very significant. Now, the person who wrote the letter, and I corresponded back with her just briefly, that saying I was gonna take this up with the city attorney, but she and I I've gotten her correspondence, I'll send a note back, but there is a difference of approximately 10 feet in the distance. If you use the ramp to come up, it's about 112 feet. If you park in any of the three, or take the center one, it's 122 feet. However, during the winter, the stainless or the aluminum ramp presents a significant slipping problem, and of course is the out of compliance with current change requirements, the height of the railing.
You know, what has been done here is ADA compliant.
All I'm saying is if we have a ramp that does not function as a ramp, which I didn't understand beforehand,
Yeah.
that we ought to be looking with all this money out there to see if we can get money to make that at least compliant, whether you put handicapper spots there or not, so that it costs us nothing, but we can make an adaptation.
We'll certainly communicate with the county commissioner about that. And I'll send the commission a copy of our response to the letter that each of you received, that I did as well.
Okay. Have we explored with MML the possibility of doing healthcare through them? Or they don't offer that kind of?
They are not part of the consortium, and that we have been involved in other cities. Again, this is something I would just say, I don't like to change consultants just for change's sake, but we felt there were significant reasons for things that are now available that were not brought to the staff's attention here timely for us to implement, that it's worth it. And, you know, I had to call the consultant who happens to be with a firm that I brought in here 40-some years ago, and tell them I don't think they were doing the job for us.
I have no problem with trying to save money and also provide staff with better service.
You're going to announce our newest member of staff.
Oh, yes, I am sorry, or Tim. We mentioned, I'd like to introduce Ethan Hahn, who's now with the finance department. Tim is smiling again, no longer as chained to his desk all the time, or chained to the spot that now Ethan occupies when he had to do payroll. And we had our first successful, so we're glad that that's worked out well. He'll be featured in the newsletter of the e-blast as well. We made him take a picture, so.
Welcome aboard. All right, thank you very much. With that, do we have a motion to adjourn the regular city commission meeting?
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.